So I'm really honored to be here. I know this is the first conferences of its type in this country, and I know that you will have many more wonderful ones, and I'm very humbled to be asked to speak here, so thank you so much. So I've been asked to speak on this topic, is meditation medicine? Yes. Easiest talk I ever gave. Actually, before I'll expand a little bit on that. But I wanted to say that whereas Kevin, in his kind introduction, introduced me around my credentials or my experience with Warriors at Ease, which I'm very proud of, I'll say that I'm here under the banner of iRest Institute. And I would say that iRest not only has been the primary modality that I've used in working with trauma for these last 12, 13 years, and not just in military communities, but lots and lots of places, and with lots and lots of humans, whether they identified as having trauma or not. But it's also been transforming for my life and allowed me to do the work. So I just want to put that out there as well. So I'm going to share with you today on I was given this theme as the topic for my talk, and so I kind of opened up the portal and said, what should I say? What might be valuable for these folks? And what came to me is the theme of separation and connection, which I've heard coming up in many of the different talks here. And it's no accident that of all the angles that I could have taken to answer this question that's been put to me today, that the theme of separation and connection would be kind of where I landed and what found me as I planned this talk. I grew up a member of the middle class in the late 50s and 60s in the U.S., and I grew up in a very white bread kind of family, 4 kids and 2 hetero parents. It's like not the norm anymore, but was then. And we were raised with a lot of love and with a really virulent form of fundamentalism religion. And by the time I hit early adolescence in the late 60s, my family environment had become very toxic for me. And I left home at 14, and I never returned home again. And I have reconciled with my family over many years, but I never went back. And I became a teen mom. I lived in seedy, cockroach-filled hotels, and I got to know a lot of drug addicts and criminals and people who lived in poverty and hadn't had anywhere near the kinds of advantages that I had had in my life. I saw an entirely new side of life in those years, and it was a very dark side of life for the most part. And it was also quite an education for me. I was depressed and fearful and lonely, as you might imagine. And then I became a mother at barely 16. And I can't even describe the overwhelm that came with, having no idea how to really even take care of myself. Now there was someone else to take care of. So even after I started reconciling with my family a few years later and re-entered high school and got on welfare and began to get my life back on track, that time left an indelible mark on my nervous system and my mind and my body that's still there. And I know that I experienced a whole series of unwise decisions that I made for many years because of that original severance with my family and the trauma that it caused for me. So when I was 18 years old, I was lucky enough to be invited on a yoga retreat. Now this is way back before yoga was available very often, but I was a hippie chick and that sounded groovy to me, so I went. And of course, I didn't know at that time that that weekend would change the course of my life, but it did. And after practicing for a few days, these strange positions and breath practice and meditations, I felt something inside that I had no words for. It was like a really deep letting go, or a kind of an easing, very, very fundamental easing. I think I touched into the wholeness in me for the first time in a long time, because I had felt very broken. I didn't have any idea what it was, but I knew I needed a hell of a lot more of it. So now I'll fast forward, and much to my surprise, I find myself at 61 sitting before you and telling you some stuff. And I've used my life, I've spent my life using meditative practices and teachings to heal myself, and sharing these with others from all kinds of different walks of life, people I would have probably not met in any other way. Now, my guess is if we had time and I had a chance to ask each one of you what brought you to meditation, or what's making you consider the possibility of meditation in your life, it might have something to do with a very severe, profound experience of separation of some type. Not the same kind I had, but if you look underneath, there's probably some experience of separation there. So let's go back now to the question of, is meditation medicine? Medicine for what? Well, medicine is for when we're ill and when we're suffering, right? So we know that about 90% of illness is related to stress. And there are tons of kinds of stressors, money problems, family problems, work problems, political problems. Believe me, I live very close to that. And I live 8 miles from the White House. Thanks for getting me the hell out of there. So there are many kinds of stressors, all of them feeling like a real, a threat to our system. But my thesis in talking with you today is that the underlying, if you look closely, that the underlying stressor or threat in most stressors is this feeling of aloneness, this fear that we have that is so deep of being alone, of that, gosh, life is really scary and I'm in it by myself. It's up to me. So I'm not a quantum scientist, to say the least, but one of the best metaphors that I can find for what I'm talking about of separation and connection is that it comes from quantum physics. And quantum mechanics tells us that light can behave simultaneously as a particle and it can behave as a wave. And I think that's the same as human beings. We are particles. You look different than me, and you have a different story than me. We grew up in different places and so on. We have different personalities and different strengths and limitations. So there is a granularity or a uniqueness to each one of us, the particleness of us. And we are also, without doubt, a part of a wave, something that's beyond separation, that you can't isolate particles in. It's not unlike aspen trees, as you may have heard. They look like individual trees when they grow in groves, but what we found is when you look underneath those groves, there are, as big as a grove can be, miles, square miles, there's a common root system. So really what this is one organism that looks like a bunch of trees that are individual. And that's the same with us. So yesterday, that wonderful first presentation in the morning with Dr. Hassad, he showed study after study after study that shows how modern lifestyles both result in and cause more feeling of disconnection in our lives. More of the particleness is highlighted. And Mother Teresa said, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten we belong to one another. More and more of us are forgetting more and more of the time our belonging, and it's making us very ill. What we most fear, and what is most stressful to us, humans, is being separated from each other and from the web of life. We're not meant to be in this alone. And we're not, but we think we are sometimes. So just a few illustrations. Some of them you may have heard before, but just to kind of underline this power of disconnect and connect. In 1944, in the US, an experiment was conducted on 40 newborn infants to determine whether people could thrive alone on physiological needs being met, without affection. 20 newborn infants were kept in a special facility where they had caregivers who would go in just enough time to bathe them and feed them and change their diapers. But they were instructed to not look at the children any more than they needed to. This actually makes me cry every time I hear about it. And they were not to communicate with them at all or touch them any more than was needed. And the other kids got all of that physiologically and were nurtured and cared for. So the experiment had to be halted after 4 months because half of the babies had already died in the first group. And there was no physiological cause for their death. They were all physically very healthy. Before each baby died, there was a period where they would stop verbalizing and trying to engage with their caregivers. Generally stop moving. They wouldn't cry, and they wouldn't even change their expression. And death would follow shortly after. In the control group, where the infants had, all of their needs met, even though they weren't by parents, none of those babies died during the period of time. Now, I hope we would never do an experiment about that again, but I'm so glad that it happened because it really is a very good illustration. I think the recent hubbub, I'm not getting into this much, but there's just like a level of uproar and outrage that should be there in my country about what's going on in my country with the Trump administration. But there's one thing they did recently about separating children from parents as they came in that raised above that level of din so loud all around the world that said, hell no, you will not do this. That they're backing off on it now, and they're quickly retreating on that one particular thing because we know that is not okay, right? Another example from another domain where I've spent most of my energy in the last many years is in the military and veteran community. So for a number of years, it was assumed that the cause of PTSD was combat experiences, makes sense, and that the incidence of PTSD could be predicted most likely by the number of deployments in combat zones and the severity of the combat experiences that people had. So that makes sense as a theory, and that's what everybody went on there at the beginning of the wars. However, as research was completed more and more, what they found was that the data wasn't really lining up with that theory. People, for one thing, were getting PTSD within 6 months of coming home from deployments at a greater rate than they did when they were actually deployed. So what was up with that? Now, I was working at Walter Reed in an acute PTSD treatment program as the meditation and yoga teacher during the 2006 to 2012. And during that time, I read Sebastian Junger's book that came out I can't remember exactly when, a few years ago, and it's called Tribe, on Homecoming and Belonging. And this very powerful book is based on his experience of embedding with a lot of U.S. troops embedded in Afghanistan, actually probably all Allied troops. And he came up with a very different understanding of what's causing PTSD. I'm going to quote from him for a few minutes. These vets return from wars that are safer than those their fathers and grandfathers fought, and yet far greater numbers of them wind up alienated and depressed. This is true even for people who didn't experience combat. In other words, the problem doesn't seem to be trauma on the battlefield so much as re-entry into society. A modern U.S. soldier returning from combat goes from the kind of close-knit situation that humans evolved for into a society where most people work outside the home, children are educated by strangers, and families are isolated from wider communities. There are obvious psychological stressors on a person being a part of a group, but there may be even greater stresses on persons in isolation. Most higher primates, including humans, are intensely social, and there are few examples of individuals surviving outside of groups. This is still younger. Whatever the technological advances of modern society, and they're really miraculous, the individual lifestyles that these technologies spawn are deeply brutalizing to the human spirit. So basically, when people came back, they went into war, even though they were involved in something really, really difficult and challenging, and for some traumatic. The closeness of the unit and the tightness of the connection in the military units inoculated them from PTSD in a way that they did not experience when they got back, and they didn't have that shared purpose, and they didn't have the connection of their brothers and sisters in the military. And not only that, in this very atomistic society that the U.S. is more and more becoming. So actually, a lot of veterans return coming home after their deployments the second war. So disconnection leads to disease. And the good news is, though, there is that there is abundant medicine for the disease of disconnection. And it's very close within our reach. In fact, if you reach out, there is some medicine right beside you. Up until recently, and it especially helps to feel more hopeful and know that there is abundant medicine available for a disease of disconnection if we can look underneath the current paradigm of what we're told is happening and why people are not doing so well in our materialistic culture, individualistic culture, and see that really what's underlying there, in my perspective, is this separation, this experience of separation. So when we start looking at things that way, we know we have the medicine. It's just a question of accessing it. So up until recently, the scientific perspective held that the human response to stressors, our only responses were to what? Fight, flee, or freeze, right? That's what we all learned. But the yoga teachers have told us for thousands and thousands of years, and all the spiritual traditions, that there's another option. And now science is confirming that option too, like they're confirming a lot of other things that these traditions have told us. So first, the science, quickly. Polyvagal theory is now revealing a much more nuanced view of our nervous systems than just fight, fly, and flee. That's there, but we have a very effective third option. And in fact, it's the first thing that higher primates go to, if not conditioned not to. And that is, they're calling it tend and befriend. It's connection. It's in social engagement. It's feeling close with one another. Love and belonging. More and more evidence is showing that connection and belonging are medicine, which inoculates us from stress and disease and prevents and lowers stress that we already have. Just consider the words illness and wellness. I in illness, and there's a we in wellness, right? So the healing's in the we. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, is excreted when we experience belonging or closeness with others. A few of its magic qualities: it reduces levels of stress hormone, cortisol goes down, strengthens immune function, results in and promotes more human attachment, reduces drug cravings, improves social skills. And that's just a few of its benefits. And we make that medicine naturally when we connect. When we're feeling relatively well bonded and a sense of belonging in our lives, we have this natural inoculation where when bad things happen, and they do, they don't stick as hard. They don't stick as long as they would without each other. And when we already feel stressed out or sick, the connection, tending, and befriending can help us weather the storm with less suffering. So polyvagal theory suggests that social connection is ours as higher order mammals' first line of defense against life's challenges, or best way of being with life and in life. Relationality is where it's at, folks. A couple of studies just to point that out. We know that pain lessens with connection, women giving birth. When I gave birth, they wouldn't let me have anybody in the room, and that was standard practice. Now, of course, families are in rooms, right? So we are learning a little bit. Women, there was one study that showed people that go into surgery and have a loved one holding their hand right before or during a not full anesthesia procedure have less pain and less complications. One of my favorite examples is a study from 2001 where researchers conducted a meta-analysis of over 400 manualized treatments for depression. So they were looking at like what works, what really works here among these 400 treatments. And guess what? They found out it didn't really matter what treatment was being deployed. What mattered was the most in terms of a beneficial outcome was the quality of relationship between the therapist and the client. Sharon Salzberg, a really well-known meditation teacher, asked a psychiatrist, what's the agent of change in therapy? And his response was, it's the love in the room. So science and spiritual traditions are now converging in yet another way, and that is to tell us the connection is where it's at. That the more connected we are to ourselves, the healthier we'll be. And so will our planet be. What does this have to do with meditation? I'm coming back. Almost all traditions of meditation are based on the principle of oneness, that we are one, that we're the wave, that the wave is our true nature. And the connection is a fact. We don't have to believe it, it's just a fact. Now at 30,000 feet, it's easy to say that we're all connected. And we meditators can agree on that without a problem, no matter what our tradition, right? And we like to wear t-shirts with cosmic sayings on them. And we like to put bumper stickers on our cars. And yet sometimes it's hard to find the we in meditation. Actually, some of the allure of getting people into meditation practices is to escape the hell that is other people, right? Advertisements for meditation and yoga retreats most often picture a lone person sitting on a lone dock or beach, alone, in nature, alone, with a blissful look on their face, right? Alone. I think we're aiming way too low when we buy into the idea that the purpose of our practice, our sacred practice, is merely to feel better or to escape from the mundane, the yuck and muck and messy reality of being a human being. So how do we close the gap? Believe me, it's in me big time, between, yeah, oh yeah, we're all one, you're all one, but don't cut me off in traffic, okay? How do we close the gap between that 30,000 foot and what it really means to be close with other people, what it really means to be in relationship with other people? I mean, personally, I find it hard to be to maintain my relationships with my wonderful husband, my friends, and my family, much less all those people who voted for Trump, okay? So I'm going to need some serious skills, is what I can say. And actually, I think we need some strong connection superpower to deal with what's going on in the world more than ever. So let's look at our practice for a moment. It's often said that there are two wings of practice. Wing one, can I see what is really happening right now? Okay. Wing two, can I be with it lovingly? How do we develop both? So a recent study spread some light on this. It was called and then Source in one word with a big S if you want to look it up. And the study looked at different outcomes, or looked at different types of practices, and did they have the same or different outcomes. It was a really good study, and I just want to highlight one thing about it. They took 3 groups of similar people, like kind of matched people, and introduced them to just 3 distinct types of practice, one at a time, and measured the outcomes of their practice in biomarkers as well as self-report. And there were really interesting findings in this study, but for my purposes, let me share one of them which is that mindful training, mindfulness practices are really helpful for certain things. They're helpful for self-regulation, for activating the relaxation response, calm awareness, lowering blood pressure, heart rate, all of that. So they're good for self-regulation. Extremely important that we get regulated. And it also offers mindfulness practices help because we're learning to observe our thoughts and feelings, that we can start to have a more objective observation of what's actually occurring in the moment, inside of us and over there, than we would without that self-regulation and that ability to step back and observe. So it's really, really useful. When we're not regulated, we're so reactive and everything's so personal and we're so hair on fire that there's not really, it clouds our view. We know we really can't see what's going on. And we so identify with our thoughts and feelings that, again, we can't, there's no breeze that can blow through so that we can actually see, that's just a belief. May or may not be true. So, or whatever that person's doing is triggering me a lot. Oh, it's just like my father, it's just like my whatever. We don't have that space when we're not regulated and we can't observe. But interestingly enough, the resource study showed that mindful practice alone has no impact on compassion. It does not increase our ability to connect, to love, and to see another's perspective. Or it doesn't increase our willingness to sacrifice for the common good. And I'll say, humbly so, that we in this room, though we haven't had an easy road to hoe, we're among the privileged people in our society. All right? So it's going to take some sacrifice on our part for the common good, and we're the ones to do it, in my opinion. So mindful practice is necessary, this first wing, but it's not sufficient practice for becoming really skilled super connectors that we need to do. We need compassion, being able to step into another person's shoes, and the willingness to sacrifice for a greater good. So how do we develop that second wing, that wing that says, okay, this is happening over here, in here, or over there. Can I be with it lovingly? That's where the principle of welcoming comes in from iRest meditation. And I will say that, the first several stages of iRest, and I'm not going to give a whole talk on iRest, but you can learn more if you look up here or talk to Fioko or Lee or several other people here. But the beauty of iRest meditation is that the whole technology is in one package, both wings in one package, the whole complement of what it is to be a human being. So you get the mindfulness practices in the first couple of stages, and that regulation starts to come for people, and they start to feel like, I'm not spinning anymore. Yeah. And then the second wing, the opportunity to welcome. So welcoming is a fundamental skill that we're honing all the time when we practice iRest meditation. iRest has the, never mind, scratch, okay. So iRest has the structure and the tools that allow us to learn little by little how to welcome life the way it is. So it's a curious, warm relationship with reality, inside, outside, as it presents itself in each moment. Welcoming is an aspect of our true nature. We are a welcoming when we're the wave. It's a deep, unconditional listening to what is arising in life. It's non-judgmental, curious, and it assumes that we are all complete and whole. There's nothing we need to fix or change about ourselves or each other. It helps us to drop in and be present. And the underlying principle of welcoming is that everything wants to be seen, heard, connected with, and belong to. Everything wants to be loved. So that it's a beautiful poem, The Guest House, that you're probably familiar with. This is all about welcoming. You know, this human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Okay, so you probably know the poem. So welcoming begins at home, over here. When I was working with the service members, active duty service members at Walter Reed, and when I work with anybody with trauma, the welcoming always starts here. Can I welcome that oh shit moment when I realize that that person over there is starting to have a panic attack? Can I welcome the revulsion I sometimes feel when I hear what people have done, or what they're carrying, or what's been done to them? It begins at home. The full-time job of welcoming visitors arriving in this guest house. So in honing my skills of connection, welcoming helps me learn to be with the other in myself first and foremost. Can I be with the seedy side of me, the greedy side of me, the bossy side of me, the needy side of me, the judgmental, jealous, envious, insecure, and arrogant parts of me? Not just tolerate them, because welcoming, the word sounds warm and kind. Not just tolerate. Thich Nhat Hanh says, go back and take care of yourself. Your body needs you. Your feelings need you. Your perceptions need you. Your suffering needs you to acknowledge it. Go home and be there for all these things. So go home to meditation practice and slog it out over and over and over again. Because guess what? We find out when we go in a little bit at a time, what we can handle a little bit at a time, that we're way bigger than we thought we were. Welcoming emotions and thoughts in our guest house during meditation, I think the biggest challenge for me has been learning to feel, to climb down out of my head, and knowing and analyzing, oh yeah, that's that, oh yeah, that's that, is different than sensing and feeling. The somatic experience of emotions and beliefs in our body and being with them as they are without trying to banish them or relax them or fix them. This is what iRest has offered me in my life. So body scans become not a relaxation exercise, but a way of building skills at meeting my sensations in the moment, and a way of learning to love the myriad parts of me. So this can all sound kind of self-indulgent, but it isn't a luxury. In welcoming ourselves, we learn what feelings feel like, and it's the only way we can learn what feelings feel like, is to feel them. We learn the colors and textures of anger and sadness and jealousy from here, inside out. We learn that we have parts of us that are like Mother Teresa, and we have parts of us that are like Hitler. And we have parts of us that are like Gandhi, and we have parts of us that are like, yes, Donald Trump. This grows humility and compassion, because this is what it is to be a human being. Carl Jung wrote, well, first of all, what happens if we don't do the work over here of welcoming? We're going to be projecting that stuff out on other people. That is what we do. So Carl Jung wrote, we are still certain that we know what other people think or what their true character is. We're convinced that certain people have all the bad qualities we don't know in ourselves. And if you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all their projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a person has saddled herself with new problems and conflicts because she's unable to say at this point, they're wrong or they must be fought against. Such a person knows that whatever is wrong in the world is here in herself and only learns to deal with her shadow. Only when she learns to deal with her own shadow has she done something real for the world. This is hard work, and I totally get it why people don't do it. I had the advantage of a good teacher, and I still would rather watch TV and eat a lot of chocolate a lot of the time, okay? So that's us. This is our part, welcoming. First step, number one, welcoming what's over here. But what about what's going on over there? What about that client that comes to you or that student or your uncle? Knowing ourselves to be the wave, we realize more and more there is no other, just many reflections of us, many flavors of the one. Now, my primary work has been with trauma, and I've done most of it with active duty and veteran service members and families. Not only combat trauma these people have been through, but long and multiple separations from each other, rape and sexual assault. Now, ostensibly, when I get in that room with folks, my job is to teach them yoga and meditation, to heal their trauma and manage their stress and grow their resiliency. But I understand my job is something more. My job is to welcome them. That's what my teacher taught me. My job is to welcome the wholeness in them, even though they don't recognize it or feel it at this point. My job is to connect with what is connectable in them, to be undaunted by whatever they've done or whatever they've said or whatever they have been through. I try to be a welcoming, and it's very challenging at times. So there's this one guy, Ted, that came back to me when I was writing this talk, and he was a really tough-looking guy in his 50s that I met in the program there at Walter Reed. He loved his little 4-year-old granddaughter, and he showed pictures of her wherever he went, and he's like, she's what I live for, she keeps me alive, she's the only person I ever really want to be around. I was so moved. Oh, no. I was so moved by Ted and felt such a close affinity. He was really easy to welcome. And then the next day, I heard him talking to somebody else, but I heard him saying how much he loved killing people, how much he loved killing Iraqis, how much pleasure he got in it, how much he missed being able to go back and do it again in the same person. These things were there. I had to do a lot of welcoming. I had to do a lot of welcoming so I could show up with welcoming the next day after I heard that. And later I heard that at the heart, from a therapist there, that at the heart of Ted's trauma was that he had killed a child in Iraq, an Iraqi child, because often they carried covered bombs, and these bombs had killed some of his team members. But this kid that he killed was unarmed. So anyway, I need to close. Doing this work takes lots of self-care, lots of regulation, a steady diet of support and connection to venture into deep welcoming. It's not something you want to do alone at the beginning. Find yourself a good teacher. For me, it took years with a loving, wise teacher, beautiful teachings from the tantric tradition, therapy, exercise, nature, a good dog, and the love of a good man, and lots of good friends. And I'm just beginner. So to finish up here, I'm coming. I'm proposing here that we begin to look at the problems that we're facing in ourselves and in our world through the lens of separation and connection. Because there's something we can do about that, and because it's what's really happening in my mind. So we're at a moment in evolutionary development. Can we move beyond our reflexive fight-flight responses to stress and making people other, and move more and more and grow our tend and befriend muscles and superpower skills? I think meditation can play a role in helping us to realize that we're the medicine. We're the medicine. In our meditation practice, both wings can help us release that medicine into the world. It can help us connect with the part of us that's whole and complete and has never been hurt, and that in all others. And it can help us learn to be with the brokenness that's also there. It'll help us come down from our 30,000-foot perches and get real about connecting. It takes a lot of time. It's kind of like combing knots out of long hair. You got to start at the bottom and go just a little bit at a time, because if you start it up here, it's going to yank it and then it's going to get worse. So just a little bit at a time. And it's really challenging. But I'm going to say one last thing here, and that is that I'm going to urge us in the meditation community to take it a bit further. Let's not stay too close to home with our welcoming. Let's hone our skills, keep honing them, both wings, especially the superpower connector skills, and use our capacities to reach out more. Let's reach out more to communities with less wealth, less education, and less racial privilege than we have. Not so much to teach them meditation and bring them answers. That's not what they need from us right now. What they need is to be listened to be welcomed as they are. Voices of humanity that have been squelched for a long, long time. Parts of us, parts of the one that need to be heard. So let's go into those environments and be a welcoming. And we too will be healed. That's my experience. I've never felt such deep communion and wholeness and my own experience of oneness than I have in a dark room with 8 guys that the world would have labeled totally broken. I had the most profound experiences of connection in that room. And I have been so healed by learning to relate and connect to people I never thought I could. So I'll end with a poem, If Prayer Would Do It, by Stephen Levine. If reading esteemed thinkers would do it, I'd be halfway through the patriarchs. If discourse would do it, I'd be sitting with His Holiness every moment he was free. If contemplation would do it, I'd have translated the periodic table to poems, converting matter to spirit. If even fighting would do it, I'd already be a black belt. If anything other than love could do it, I'd have already done it. I've left the hardest for last. We're the medicine. Thank you.